Chapter 12. Council of War. A sudden snap could be heard. The two ends of the handcuffs hit Richard, each like a crack of the whip. The boy bit into the gag with force. He was in such pain, but he now had free hands. He massaged his sore wrists a bit, then hurried to undo the plastic cord that was restraining his feet and remove the dirty cloth that was making it difficult for him to breathe. He opened his mouth, finally filling his lungs with air. He did it! He had succeeded in removing his handcuffs and could now leave and finally look for a bathroom. He had proved himself smarter than a secret agent. As a thought crossed his mind, he turned his head, his gaze fixed on one of the men in black, who was moaning and slowly writhing, tied up with his head covered. He couldn't leave him like that, even though he was dying to get out of the small room as quickly as possible. He needed to help him. He sighed, approached the man, and removed the cover from his head. It was Weasel. Richard had been hoping that it would be Lone Wolf, the leader, who seemed to be the most professional of the three, but at least it wasn't fair with his lisp that drove him crazy. "I'll free you right away," the young man whispered to him. "Just give me a moment." In several minutes, the agent was free and breathing with difficulty. "How did you manage to get free?" he asked. Richard pointed out the small nail sticking out from the wall several centimeters from the ground. It was incredible to think that such a tiny piece of metal could be so useful. Weasel shook his head. "If my head hadn't been covered, I would have seen it right away, but these criminals know their job well and understand where to look out for danger." Okay, Richard interrupted, beginning to get impatient. What are we going to do now?" "We need to get in contact with Dido. Lone Wolf has a transmitter implanted in one of his teeth, but if he's gagged, he can't use it." "Okay, then, let's go find him," proposed Richard, almost at the same time as thinking, "and I hope we'll come across a bathroom along the way." Eva Skinner was beginning to feel bored. They had been shut in this dark tower for a very long time now. Xana and Alita had disappeared, and she really wanted to take a walk. Fortunately, she had met Odd. Eva's memories about him were somewhat confusing, though. From time to time, things would pop back up in her head of what she had done or said while under the control of Xana, but the images seemed distant to her, as if they belonged to the mind of someone else. For Xana, Odd simply seemed to be an idiot. Eva, however, found him nice. He always had a joke to tell, and he was trying to entertain her as best as he could. And his Catboy getup was pretty interesting. In any case, it was better than his friend Ulrich's Japanese clothes. Furthermore, Odd seemed to be a real expert in music. He knew the Subdigitals and owned all their soundtracks. They at least had something in common, but she was so bored. Odd stood suddenly, jumped on the wall, ran several meters towards the ceiling, let himself hang from the smooth surface with the claws from his hands and his feet, performed an elegant pirouette, and landed in front of Eva with a bow. Surprised, the young girl applauded. "Stop clowning around, Odd," Ulrich reprimanded him, who had been until then off to the side talking with Yumi. Odd stuck his tongue out at him. "I'm getting bored. I mean, we're here, stuck in a tower on Lyoko, while who knows what is happening in the real world." "It's true," said Yumi. "I'm really worried about my parents and all the others. Let's hope that nothing happens to them." Eva shrugged. These French kids were really weird. "And what is it you all want to do?" she asked. "You won't stop talking about this Green Phoenix, but they're adults, and they have weapons. How do you plan on beating them? With a pair of wooden geisha sandals?" Yumi stood, her cheeks reddened in anger. "I have weapons!" she exclaimed. Angrily, the young girl grabbed the fans from her kimono sash, opened them, and threw them. They looked like a pair of boomerangs headed towards Eva at full speed. The young girl moved instinctively. She covered her face with her hands to protect herself and get out a sharp cry. "Ah!" She opened her eyes wide in surprise. Eva had always had good lungs, but her voice was exceptional this time. Before her mouth, the air had taken the form of musical notes in different colors that flew into Yumi like a blast of projectiles. The young girl in Japanese clothing recovered her fans from the air as they returned to her like boomerangs and used them like a shield against the notes, which were deflected and stuck into the wall around the tower. They must have been really sharp. "We finally discovered Eva's power," commented Odd with a teasing smile. "Yeah," observed Ulrich. "Too bad that we can't have our Lyoko powers in the real world. Otherwise, we could really show these terrorists a thing or two." "Bringing Lyoko powers to the real world," spoke Xana pensively. Eva looked towards the ceiling. He and Alita were floating towards them, descending through the air as if they were being held up by thousands of small invisible cables. The young blonde smiled. "You know what? Maybe we could do just that." The door to the storeroom was locked. Weasel wouldn't let himself be discouraged by this fact, though, and stuck the rusty nail into the side of the door to pick the lock. Then he gave Richard a wink. "See?" he said. "I'm a real professional." "Maybe so," admitted the young man. "But what do you think we should do now? There could be guards on the other side." "That won't be a problem. I'm also an expert in martial arts." Richard hoped with all his heart for this to be true. Shaking, he reached out his hand and opened the door wide. He found himself facing a hallway. Through a small window at the end, the afternoon sun's light shone through. A lot of time had passed since they'd been captured, almost an entire day, in fact. But there were no soldiers in sight. Richard and Weasel left the small room. Throughout the length of the hall there were other doors, all metal and identical to one another, like the one they had just exited. They turned a doorknob. An empty room. Trying not to make any noise, they tried again with the second door, which opened with a creak. Inside the room were two soldiers watching a small television. Alarmed by the noise, the two men sprung to their feet. Weasel threw himself at the closest one, launching into a wild attack of rapid karate strikes. The other man observed Richard, analyzing him for a moment, then grabbed a large gun from his belt. The young man began to back up, but tripped on one of the uneven slabs of floor and fell forward, hitting the soldier in the gut with his head. The man grunted and kicked Richard in the stomach, immediately knocking the wind out of him. He rolled on the floor. The soldier was already on top of him, ready to give him another kick but to the face, when the young man heard Weasel's commanding voice. "Hands in the air, my friend." Richard turned to see that the man in black had knocked out his opponent and had taken possession of his submachine gun. Weasel gestured towards Richard to get up, then forced the soldier to kneel by his unconscious partner. "Good," he exclaimed. "Richard, help me tie them up." Oric took out his katana from its sheath and played with it, tossing it from one hand to another, making it spin in the air. On Lyoko, his sword was so sharp that it could cut through anything. It could cut a manta ray in half and even cut Parax into pieces with one slice. Having it with him in the real world would be fantastic, but the young boy doubted that it would be possible. "The thing is located in the first city," Xana explained. "The castle allows me to give life to anything I want and materialize it in the real world. For example, I could create an entire army of robots." "I knew it was you," observed Dot. "You put us in one heck of a position by attacking Caddock." Xana lowered his eyes and held his gaze at the ground. I'm really sorry, but at the time my priorities were a bit different. In any case, like I said before, thanks to the castle, I can create an army, then use the towers to send it to the real world." "And that will make the creatures appear in the scanners at the factory," Oric completed. "Well, yes, precisely." The samurai boy raised his arms up high with enthusiasm. "But that's great. Then we really can win against all the tough soldiers of the Green Phoenix." "All 5 of you will," Xana said immediately afterwards. "I'll be staying here to control my creatures from a distance. But we have another problem." Yumi, who up until now had remained silent, nodded with a taciturn look about her face. "Mako could shut down the supercomputer at any moment," she said. "Exactly," Aelita confirmed. "That's why we need to speak to Jeremy. We need to find a way to prevent Mako from using the command post until we finished our attack. But how can we contact him?" Xana smiled. "At the moment, your friend is connected to the mirror. Opening another portal to that virtual world would be too complicated, but I can try to communicate with him." "And Jeremy will find a way to get us out of here," Odd approved. "Perfect. Let's call him right away. It's time we have a council of war." Thanks to his virtual reality glasses, Jeremy could observe the mirror from the outside as if it were a film on television. And he was watching a really interesting scene now. It was the 3rd of June, 1994, and Professor Hopper was in the attic of the Hermitage. He seemed nervous, pacing forward and back while mumbling to himself something about the code down. I need space on my disk to register the backup. Too much space, darn it! Where am I going to find such a powerful memory system? It would need to be able to conserve my data for a very long time." Several minutes later, Aelita entered the room. Jeremy's heart sank upon seeing her. What he was seeing in front of his eyes was a recording from 10 years ago, but Aelita was still exactly identical. At that moment, Jeremy decided that he needed to find a way to describe her to her mother. Anthea hadn't yet recovered all her memories, but the boy had noticed a strange happiness about her. And the tears. "Can I help you with anything?" Lita said to her father in the mirror. "Perhaps you can," the professor replied, "but I don't know if it's a good idea. I mean, I don't know what kind of effect it will have on you." These words activated something in Jeremy's head, and his brain began to work at full speed, like a finger following a complex treasure map. The code down, Hopper, who needed an unbelievable amount of space to save a backup copy and didn't know what effect it would have on Aelita. The incomprehensible codes of Richard's palm computer, an activation program, and something else. Jeremy smiled. Professor Hopper was a genius. Several moments later, before Jeremy's surprised eyes, appeared the face of a boy with blonde hair. Xana winked at him. "I've detected that you can't speak to me," he said, "but as long as you can hear me, that'll be enough. Your friends and I have decided that." Jeremy listened carefully to Xana's idea. It could work well. All that was necessary was to work at a time and act all at once. They really had a chance at taking down the Green Phoenix. And so, Jeremy left his hunch to the side in a corner of his memory for now.